mentioned this idea of people being able to get infected after having the vaccine, and the vaccine protecting against severe disease. And so we're sort of implying that this vaccine doesn't result in sterilizing immunity. And I think we've had conversations about this a bunch of times before. Can you get herd immunity if sterilizing immunity doesn't happen? And what do we know about other vaccines and if they really induce sterilizing immunity or not?
I mean, how many vaccines induce sterilizing immunity? Measles.
Okay. Does it?
Vaccine does that. And 2 doses of measles vaccine induces lifelong protection, 97% chance of lifelong protection. And a single infant. I mean, I'm of an age where I had measles as a child. I'm protected for the rest of my life against all manner of measles disease. True. And measles shedding. That virus just bounces off me if I come but that's not most vaccines. Nonetheless, you're able to get it. I mean, a lot of these vaccines don't prevent asymptomatic shedding. Rotavirus vaccine doesn't really do that. The conjugate pneumococcal vaccine doesn't do that. Certainly the pertussis vaccine doesn't do that. The influenza vaccine doesn't do that. But
what about hepatitis B?
Hepatitis B in terms of sterilizing immunity.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It might actually induce sterilizing immunity because you can do right. But see, and the reason you can do that, it's easier to do that with long incubation period diseases. I mean, it has weeks. I mean, when you're looking at like rotavirus and flu, their incubation periods are just a few days. So, the immunological memory will kick in about, 3 to 5 days after exposure. So you can modify the disease, but you don't really eliminate it.
Did you mention HPV vaccine in terms of sterilizing?
Yeah, that probably, at least for the goal of preventing cancer. Yeah.
Okay. But influenza vaccines, they're probably not sterilizing, right?
No, the influenza, I mean, you think the influenza vaccine is about 50 to 60% effective.
Yeah.
And for older people, it's not particularly effective at all.
So we could very well end up in a situation where people who have been vaccinated or been infected with SARS-CoV-2 are protected from developing symptoms, but are capable of acting as shedders, at which point the concept of herd immunity doesn't really protect people who are not vaccinated or previously exposed.
Although I think it may not protect against asymptomatic shedding, but I would predict, and we'll find this out, I think, soon, in those who are not immunized, that you would shed less virus.
Okay.
I think that would be the likelihood.
Right.
You think you would shed less so as not to transmit?
Good question. We'll see.
Yeah. I mean, so is herd immunity possible?
Yes. Can we achieve herd immunity? Well, it depends how you define herd immunity. If you define herd immunity as completely eliminating this virus in this country, no. If you define it as being able to get to the point where we can, live with the degree of cases and hospitalizations and deaths, we'll see. I mean, what's interesting is that, flu this year is like gone. I mean, last year, typically with flu, between 150 and 200 children die every year of flu. Okay, this year, at last I looked on the CDC data, it was one child has died. I mean, there's something to be said for masking and social distancing, preventing all manner of respiratory illness. I mean, you wonder coming out of this whether the lesson will be, maybe we should do what people do in Japan or South Korea, which is wear masks over the winter months. I mean, I don't think we're going to do that. I mean,
now that we all have these cool masks, we ought to, get some use out of them after this.
I'm really glad to hear a nuanced definition of herd immunity, which I think I've been sort of doing with a lot of uncertainty myself, because I think people get into semantic arguments, that get pretty horrible about whether or not it'll cause herd immunity. And I think having a more nuanced definition helps deal with that.
I think we're already starting to see it. I think we're already starting to see evidence of herd immunity.
But so the concerns that do come up, if we're getting to the point of just living with this virus and it's never going to be gone, we're not on an eradication path here. The one concern that I have, and the one rather cynical observation I have, is first the concern, which is that especially in countries that are going to have a much harder time vaccinating their whole population or any significant portion of it, the virus is going to be much harder for them to control, and the casualties are going to be much higher. And that's not something that I expect any of us to have any ready solutions for, because the Gates Foundation and others have been pouring billions of dollars into the basis of that problem for many years. But that's the concern. And then the kind of cynical observation is, maybe this is how we get rid of the anti-vaxxers.
What's interesting is that it's such an important point. You're only as strong as your weakest country out there. Why do we still give a polio vaccine in the United States? We haven't had wild type polio in this country since the 70s. We give it because it's still occurring in Afghanistan and Pakistan. We give it because it's very possible that somebody could fly into LAX with a Guardia who's asymptomatically shedding polio. That's why we give it. If we let our guard down, we could see what the polio could come back as possible. So you're only as strong as your weakest country. I mean, I think when the last administration chose to sort of back away from the WHO consortium, that was short-sighted and stupid. This is not how much more information do we need that what happens in one country can affect the world?